I think most of you probably are aware of the St. Louis River that connects the Great Lakes to the Atlantic Ocean. Technically, it was named in the early 1600s by French explorers. They named the bay, the St. Lawrence Bay, because they arrived at it on the 10th of August, on this feast day of St. Lawrence. And eventually the river that feeds that bay took that same name, and eventually the entire St. Lawrence Seaway, with its construction of dams and locks that now allow that deep shipping route all the way through all of the 5 Great Lakes, all the way as far west as Duluth, Minnesota. And I think sometimes we take for granted how important that water access is. For much of human history, and still very importantly today, the wealth of a region was basically largely impacted on how movable those goods were. And the best way to move large quantity of goods is by water, on ship. And so there is so much potential in the Great Lakes region and in its surrounding countryside, so much potential wealth. But unless that wealth can be connected out to the broader world, it's useless wealth. You could think about it in the same way as the asteroid belt. And some of those probes sent out to the asteroid belts have found asteroids, relatively small asteroids even, that they determine have some trillions of dollars worth of gold and other precious metals upon them. But without any way to bring those materials back into a market, it's more or less worthless out there. It's not doing anyone any good. And so, in some ways, that St. Lawrence Seaway and that connection to the Atlantic Ocean has opened up that possibility and made that natural good so much greater and provided good for so many more people. And I think in some ways that's a good analogy for the saints and for St. Lawrence himself, that there is a reminder and an acknowledgement that we are all precious. We are all created good, and God does love us. And there is so much wealth and potential in us. But the reality of it is, if it's not connected to something greater, if it's not connected to the ocean, if it's not connected through the church, it's going to waste. And it's not doing you or anyone else any real good. And it is very often those saints who are the ones who connect us to God. They are the ones who teach and proclaim the truth. They are the ones who, by their service and their lives, connect us in faith to this reality that God has called us to. Not a life lived for self, not a life closed off from everything else, not a life that is wasted, but one that can be opened up to the world and so bring so much riches and wealth to others and ourselves. And that wealth of faith, which really matters. We are called not just to benefit ourselves, but to benefit the church and to continue to help others grow in their faith and strengthen them as well. And it is by that lives of the saints, and St. Lawrence did this in so many ways during his life, as entrusted with the treasury in Rome. He was entrusted also with caring for the poor, for distributing to those in need, and he was beloved for it. And he pointed out the poor as the greatest treasure of the church. And yet, all of that still pales in comparison to his martyrdom. Yes, his life enriched many and enriched the church, but in his death and in his martyrdom, he has enriched it far more than he ever could in even a large city like Rome during his lifetime. Because by his intercession, by his example, lifted up and celebrated by the whole universal church, he has continued to connect each of us to something greater, to that communion of saints, to that life of faith, and to the church, that holy Catholic Church here on earth. He is that waterway connecting us to something greater. And in the shedding of his blood and the giving of his life, the following of Christ, even to death, he has brought so much good, so much spiritual wealth, in so many ways that it is not even possible perhaps to calculate how much value that is. And we should be like St. Lawrence. We should be gateways of connection to one another and to Christ. And so I think it is very fitting that the St. Lawrence Seaway is named after St. Lawrence. It's named after a saint. It is symbolic in some ways. And if there is ever some mission to go to an asteroid and bring back gold or other metals, I hope it's named after a saint as well. Because it should remind us of the connections that we are called to have, and how those connections with each other in faith and in love, those connections with God, enrich his church, enrich all of us, and keep us from that selfish mentality which isolates and destroys. St. Lawrence, deacon and martyr, pray for us.